There are moments in life that don't announce themselves. They don't come with a warning. They don't give you time to brace. They just arrive, quiet, final, and completely devastating. And on a Thursday evening in late October, in a suburb just outside of Columbus, Ohio, a woman named Carol Ann Whitfield sat alone at her kitchen table and stared at a piece of paper that had just ended 14 years of her life. The divorce was final. The house was gone. The man she had built everything with had already moved on, and he had taken almost everything with him. Carol Ann was 39 years old, and she had exactly $47,000 left to her name. Not a savings account, not a retirement fund, not a safety net. Just a single number on a bank statement that was supposed to represent the rest of her life. And what she did with that money over the next 18 months would shock everyone who ever doubted her. And that list was long. Before we go any further into this story, we'd love to know where in the world you're watching from right now. Drop your city or state in the comments below, because this community spans all across this country, and we love hearing from you. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of the stories we bring you. Because trust me, you are going to want to be here for what comes next. Now here's the thing about Carol Ann Whitfield's story that you need to understand before anything else. This isn't a story about luck. It isn't a story about a woman who stumbled into the right place at the right time. It isn't the kind of story where someone hands you a check or a lifeline shows up at just the right moment. This is a story about a woman who was handed a demolition and decided to build something out of the rubble. Literally, because with that $47,000, which by the time taxes and legal fees were deducted from her divorce settlement, was already down to $44,200, Carol Ann did something that no one in her family, not one friend, not a single contractor, not her own bank believed was possible. She bought a condemned hotel, a boarded-up, overgrown, falling-apart building in a small town in rural Tennessee that had been sitting empty for over 11 years. And the question everyone asked, the question that hung in the air every single time she told people what she was doing, was simple. Why? Why would a woman with almost nothing gamble what little she had on a building that most people in that town had been trying to forget for over a decade? The answer to that question is going to take us all the way back to where Carol Ann started. Because to understand what she did with that hotel, you first have to understand what that hotel took from someone else and what it had been hiding all along. Carol Ann Whitfield was born in 1974 in Zanesville, Ohio, a small working-class city about an hour east of Columbus. She was the second of 3 daughters born to Robert and Diane Whitfield. Robert worked at a steel finishing plant for 31 years. Diane cleaned houses on the side and ran the church bake sales on Sundays. They weren't wealthy people, but they were proud people. And Carol Ann grew up understanding something fundamental about the world, that nothing was going to be handed to her. She was going to have to reach for everything she wanted, and she was going to have to hold on to it with both hands once she got there. She was a quiet kid, not shy exactly, but observant, the kind of girl who noticed everything, who remembered the name of every person she'd ever met, who could walk into a room and instantly read the emotional temperature of every single person in it. Her teachers used to say she was either going to be a therapist or a business owner because she had a gift, a genuine, rare gift, for making people feel seen and heard and important. She graduated from Muskingum University in 1996 with a degree in business administration and a minor in hospitality management. And it was during a college internship at a small bed and breakfast in the Hocking Hills region of Ohio that something clicked for her. Something about the hospitality business, the idea of creating a space where people could feel genuinely welcomed and cared for, lit something up inside of Carol Ann that nothing else had ever touched. She used to say that a great hotel wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a place where people's lives changed, where couples fell in love, where old friends reconnected, where tired people finally rested. She believed in the power of a room to hold a story, and she never forgot that belief. She just buried it for a long time. Because in 1998, Carol Ann met a man named Douglas Mercer at a regional business conference in Cincinnati. Douglas was charming, confident, and enormously ambitious. He had the kind of self-assurance that Carol Ann had always admired, the kind that filled a room without being obnoxious about it. He was good-looking, well-dressed, and he asked Carol Ann 3 questions during that first conversation that no man had ever asked her before. He asked her what she was building, not what she did for work, what she was building, and Carol Ann, who had never been asked that question in her life, told him about her dream, the hotel, the vision she had carried since that Hocking Hills internship, the idea of restoring something forgotten and giving it new life. Douglas listened to every word. He nodded at all the right places. He looked her in the eyes and said, "I think you could actually do that." And Carol Ann Whitfield, who had spent 24 years waiting for someone to say exactly those words, fell completely in love with Douglas Mercer. They were married in June of 2000 in a small ceremony in Zanesville. Carol Ann's father walked her down the aisle. Her mother cried. Douglas's family flew in from Indianapolis. It was a beautiful day. Carol Ann wore a dress she had found at a second-hand bridal shop for $85, and she altered it herself. She used to joke that she could fix anything with enough patience and the right tools. She was not wrong. The early years were good. Douglas was building a commercial real estate consulting firm from the ground up, and Carol Ann was right beside him, managing the books, handling client communications, coordinating logistics, doing the quiet, invisible work that made Douglas look organized and capable and sharp. She put her own dreams on hold. Not because she was forced to. Let's be clear about that. Carol Ann made that choice herself. She believed in Douglas, and she believed that if she helped him build his thing first, her turn would come. That is what she told herself every single year for 14 years. Her turn would come. They had 2 children, a son named Tyler, born in 2002, and a daughter named Haley, born in 2005. Carol Ann raised those children mostly on her own because Douglas's work required him to travel constantly. Weeks in Atlanta, months in Dallas. Long stretches in Phoenix and Charlotte and Chicago. She never complained, at least not where Douglas could hear. She kept the house running, kept the kids in school and in sports and in piano lessons, and kept Douglas's business affairs in order from her home office in Columbus while he was gone. She was, in every measurable way, the operational engine of that entire family. The business grew. By 2010, Douglas Mercer's consulting firm had offices in 3 cities and was pulling in just over $4 million a year in revenue. And Carol Ann's name wasn't on a single piece of that company's paperwork. Not one. Because Douglas had structured it that way from the beginning. He had been careful, methodically, almost surgically careful, to make sure that the company was entirely in his name. Carol Ann had never pushed back on that. She trusted him. That word, trust, is going to come up again before this story's over. Because trust, it turns out, was the most expensive thing Carol Ann Whitfield ever gave away for free. By 2012, the distance between Carol Ann and Douglas had grown past the kind that comes from travel schedules and work stress. It had become the kind of distance that doesn't close. The kind where 2 people sit at the same dinner table and have nothing left to say to each other. Douglas had changed. Or maybe he had always been this person, and Carol Ann had just been too close to see it clearly. He became dismissive. He began treating Carol Ann's ideas, including the hotel idea, which she had quietly mentioned again after the kids were old enough to give her some room to breathe, with a particular kind of contempt that is worse than anger. He didn't argue with her. He just smiled faintly, like she had said something charming, but ultimately irrelevant. Like she was a child describing a castle made of clouds. Carol Ann stopped bringing up the hotel after that. She stopped bringing up a lot of things. By 2013, Douglas had hired a new marketing director for the firm, a woman named Renee, 29 years old, sharp and ambitious. And within 8 months, the rumors had reached Carol Ann through the kind of channel that rumors always travel. A friend of a friend, an overheard phone call, an explanation that didn't quite add up. She confronted Douglas in March of 2014. He didn't deny it. He sat across from her at that same kitchen table where she would later read the finalized divorce papers, and he told her he wanted out. He told her that he had felt trapped for years, that he needed to live differently, that he was sorry but he wasn't going to apologize for who he was. Carol Ann didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She just sat there very quietly for a long time, and then she said one thing. She said, "You will regret this." Not as a threat, just as a statement of fact. Douglas Mercer did not believe her. The divorce proceedings lasted 8 months. Douglas had 3 attorneys. Carol Ann had one, a woman named Patricia Holt who worked out of a small firm in Columbus and who told Carol Ann on their first meeting that the case was going to be difficult because of how meticulously Douglas had structured his assets. Patricia was not wrong. Douglas's legal team argued, successfully, that Carol Ann had been a homemaker and support role, not a business partner, and that her contributions to the firm, while significant, could not be quantified as formal equity participation. The house in the Dublin suburb of Columbus, a 4-bedroom colonial that Carol Ann had spent 12 years renovating, room by room with her own 2 hands, was sold as part of the settlement with the proceeds split. Douglas kept the business. Douglas kept the investment accounts. Douglas kept the Lexus. Carol Ann received $47,000, half the value of the household furniture, in primary custody of Tyler and Haley, who were now 12 and 9. She moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Westerville with the kids in a storage unit full of furniture she didn't have room for. She was 39 years old. She had a business degree she hadn't used in a professional capacity in 14 years. A body that ached from years of doing everything herself. And a number in her bank account that felt both like a fortune and like nothing at all, depending on which direction she was looking. Her sister Karen kept calling and telling her to take time, to heal, to figure things out slowly. Her mother told her to get a sensible job, maybe at the school, maybe in an office somewhere. Her friend Deborah, who had been through her own divorce 6 years earlier, took her out for wine and told her to stop thinking about the future for at least 3 months and just breathe. Carol Ann listened to all of them. She nodded. She said she understood. And then she pulled up a property listing on her laptop at 11 o'clock at night in that small apartment in Westerville while her kids were asleep down the hall. The listing had been sitting in her browser bookmarks for 3 years. She had found it originally while Douglas was away on one of his trips to Atlanta, had looked at it once and then closed the tab, because at the time she was still telling herself her turn was coming. Now it was open again. The property was called the Harlan House, a 22-room hotel built in 1919 in Harlan County, Tennessee, deep in the Appalachian region of eastern Tennessee, the kind of landscape that looks like someone folded the earth into mountains and forgot to unfold it. The Harlan House had operated as a local institution for most of the 20th century, hosting miners and traveling salesmen and small-town politicians, and the occasional touring musician passing through the region. It had closed in 2005, the year Haley was born, and it had been sitting empty ever since. The asking price was $43,500. Carol Ann stared at that number for a long time. She had $47,000. She closed the laptop. She sat in the dark apartment for 20 minutes. Then she opened it again and called the listing agent at 11:47 p.m. and left a voicemail. The listing agent called back the next morning. His name was Gary Caldwell, a soft-spoken man in his 60s who had been trying to sell the Harlan House for the better part of 4 years. He had shown it to developers, to preservation societies, to a man from Nashville who wanted to turn it into a recording studio, and to a church group that ultimately decided the building was too far gone to be worth the liability. When Carol Ann told Gary she was serious about buying it, he paused for a moment on the phone. Then he said very gently, "Ma'am, Sumari, I want to be honest with you about the condition of this property." She told him she had seen the photos. He said the photos didn't capture the reality. She asked him to take video. He did, and in a full walkthrough on his phone that he emailed to Carol Ann that same afternoon, she watched it 3 times. The building was in serious disrepair. The roof on the east wing had partially collapsed. There was visible mold on 3 floors. The plumbing had not been operational in 11 years. The electrical system was entirely non-functional. Several of the interior walls had water damage that had been accumulating for over a decade. The staircase in the main lobby had rotted through in 2 places. The windows on the ground floor had been boarded over. The backyard was completely overgrown, and with volunteer trees pushing up through what had once been a garden patio. And in the basement, Gary had hesitated when he got to this part of the video. In the basement, there was evidence of something that the county health inspector had flagged in 2008. Extensive asbestos insulation around the original furnace system. Gary told Carol Ann on the phone that the building had been cited twice by the county for code violations, and that any new owner would be required to remediate the asbestos as a condition of any renovation permit. He told her that his personal estimate, based on conversations with contractors in the area, was that the total renovation cost would run somewhere between $180,000 and $240,000. He was telling her this, he said, actually because he didn't want anyone walking into this situation without understanding what they were actually buying. Carol Ann thanked him for the honesty. Then she asked if anyone else had made an offer. There hadn't been one in 14 months. She offered $41,000 cash and asked for a 60-day close. The sellers, in a state that had been trying to offload the property since the original owner passed away in 2009, accepted within 48 hours. Now Carol Ann had to tell her family. Her sister Karen's reaction was immediate. Carol Ann, you have 2 children. You cannot gamble their futures on a condemned building in a part of Tennessee that most people can't even find on a map. Her mother said nothing for a long moment and then said she was going to pray. Her friend Deborah, who had encouraged her to breathe and take time, only looked at her across a restaurant table with genuine concern and said, "Honey, are you okay? I mean, are you really okay?" Patricia Holt, her divorce attorney, sent her a short email that said only, "I want you to know that I support whatever you decide, but please make sure you've thought about your children." Carol Ann had thought about her children. She had thought about them every single day for 12 and 9 years respectively, and she was thinking about them now. What she was thinking was this, that her children were watching, that Tyler and Haley, at 12 and 9, were at exactly the age where children begin to form their permanent understanding of what their parents are made of, and Carol Ann Whitfield was not going to let her children watch their mother shrink. She wired $41,000 to the title company on a Friday in December, so she kept $6,200 in her account, enough for 2 months of apartment rent, food for her and the kids, and gas. She had no renovation budget. She had no contractor. She had no plan beyond the first 30 days. What she had was a building and a belief, and for Carol Ann, that had always been enough to start. Carol Ann drove to Harlan County on a Tuesday in January, 7 weeks after the sale closed. She left the kids with her mother in Zanesville. She drove 9 hours south and east through the mountains of Kentucky and into Tennessee, alone with a notebook, a toolbox she had packed herself, and a thermos of coffee. It was raining when she arrived. Gary Caldwell met her at the property with the keys. 2 old brass keys on a ring that had been in a drawer at his office for 4 years. He handed them to her and shook her hand. And he said something she would later tell people she never forgot. He said, "I hope you see something in this place that I've stopped being able to see." And then he got in his truck and drove away. And Carol Ann Whitfield was alone in the parking lot of a building that had not had a living person inside of it in 11 years. She stood there for a moment in the rain. Then she walked to the front door, put the key in the lock, and pushed it open. The smell hit her first. 11 years of closed air and mold and old wood, and something she couldn't immediately identify. A deep, dusty, organic smell that felt like history itself pressing against her face. The lobby was dark. She turned on her flashlight. The original hardwood floors were buckled and warped, but still largely intact. And the check-in desk, a long mahogany counter that ran the full length of the east wall, was covered in a thick layer of grime but structurally solid. The ceiling above the lobby was high, with original plasterwork molding that had cracked in places but remained largely unbroken. Behind the desk, the original keyboard was still mounted on the wall. 22 brass hooks, most of them still holding their room number plaques. Some of the rooms were still numbered. Room 4, Room 11, Room 17. She walked the full building that first day, all 4 floors in the basement, with her notebook and her flashlight, cataloging everything she saw. The roof damage was worse than the video had suggested, particularly in rooms 18, 19, and 20, where the ceiling had come down entirely and the subfloor above was visibly compromised. And the asbestos in the basement was extensive and would need professional remediation before any other work could begin. The plumbing was a complete replacement job. The electrical was a complete replacement job. The east staircase was unsafe. The west staircase was structurally sound but needed reinforcement. 14 of the 22 rooms had significant water damage. 4 of those 14 were essentially unsalvageable without full gut renovation. But the bones, the original 1919 bones of the Harlan House, were still there. The foundation was solid. The load-bearing walls were sound. The mahogany desk in the lobby, the original tin ceiling in the dining room, the cast iron radiators throughout the building, the wide plank pine floors on the second floor, the hand-laid stone fireplace in what had once been a reading room off the main lobby. These things were still there, waiting. Carol Ann sat down on the floor of the old lobby that evening, with her notebook on her knees and her flashlight propped against the mahogany desk, and she made a list. Not of problems. She had already cataloged the problems. She made a list of everything that was still beautiful. The list filled 3 pages. Carol Ann had $6,200 when the purchase closed. The first thing she spent money on was the asbestos remediation, a legal requirement that she could not avoid. She called 5 certified remediation contractors in the region. The quotes ranged from $14,000 to $22,000. She did not have any of that money. What she did have was the internet and 14 years of watching Douglas build a business from nothing, which meant she knew exactly how to find creative solutions to funding problems. She called the Tennessee State Historic Preservation Office and asked about grant programs for historic building renovation. She was told that the Harlan House could potentially qualify for a state historic preservation tax credit and a matching grant through the Federal Historic Tax Credit Program, but that the application process would take months and required architectural documentation she didn't yet have. She called the Harlan County Economic Development Authority and asked about small business development loans for rural areas. She was referred to a USDA rural development program that offered low-interest loans to small businesses in economically distressed areas, which Harlan County, classified as a persistent poverty county, absolutely qualified as. And the loan process was slow. Everything was slow. But Carol Ann was not in a hurry in the way that impatient people are not in a hurry. She was in a hurry the way that determined people are not in a hurry. She was moving forward steadily, and she was not going to stop. While the loan application was being processed, she drove back to Columbus, picked up Tyler and Haley, and moved everyone into room 7 of the Harlan House, one of the 4 rooms that had sustained the least water damage, in which she had spent 3 days cleaning by hand before declaring livable. She put an air mattress on the floor. She connected a space heater to a temporary electrical hookup Gary Caldwell had arranged through the County Utility Authority. She set up a folding table for the kids to do their homework on. And she enrolled Tyler and Haley in the Harlan County school system on a Wednesday morning in February, watching them walk into a new school in a new state, in a new town, and feeling a kind of terror and pride that she did not have a word for. The USDA loan came through in April. $85,000 at a 3.5% interest rate, specifically earmarked for commercial renovation of a historic structure in a rural distressed area. It was not enough to finish the job, but it was enough to start. The asbestos was remediated in May. The plumbing contractor, a man named Earl Bowman from the next county over, who had been doing commercial plumbing for 38 years, and who Carol Ann had found through a church bulletin board, gave her a quote of $31,000 for the full building water supply and drainage system replacement. And then, after Carol Ann showed him the plans for what she was trying to do in the history of the building, told her he would do it for $24,000 and take the rest in trade, meaning Carol Ann would give him and his wife a complimentary 4-night stay every year for the next 3 years once the hotel was operating. She shook his hand on that deal so fast that Earl Bowman laughed out loud. That is how the Harlan House got its plumbing back. The electrical work was handled similarly. A licensed electrical contractor named Marcus Webb from Knoxville, who had done restoration work on historic buildings throughout eastern Tennessee, and who told Carol Ann, after walking the property, that it was one of the most interesting buildings he had encountered in 20 years of work. Marcus did the full electrical for $19,500, below his standard rate, because as he told Carol Ann over coffee at the diner across the street, "I want to see this thing open. I drove past it for 20 years on my way to other jobs, and I always wondered what it looked like inside." Carol Ann was learning something during these months that she would later describe as the most important thing the Harlan House taught her. She was learning that people want to be part of something that matters, that if you can show someone a vision, a real, tangible, emotionally compelling vision, and make them feel that their contribution is not just transactional, but meaningful, people will give you more than you ask for. She was holding the building together not just with tools and loan money, but with story. And with the story of what this place had been and what it could be again. And the people of Harlan County, a community that had spent decades watching jobs disappear and buildings fall down and young people leave and not come back. They were hungry for that story. They needed it. Word spread the way. Word spreads in small towns, through diners and church parking lots and hardware store conversations. People started showing up at the Harlan House on weekends, not just to watch, but to help. A retired carpenter named Walt Gruber, who had built half the houses in the county, spent 4 Saturdays rebuilding the east staircase with lumber he brought from his own shed. A woman named Louise Tate, who had grown up in Harlan County and whose grandmother had worked as a housekeeper at the Harlan House in the 1940s, has brought Carol Ann a box of photographs she had kept in her attic for decades. Black and white images of the hotel in its prime, showing the lobby filled with guests, the dining room set for service, the garden patio strung with lights. Carol Ann wept when she saw those photographs. She made copies and pinned them to the walls in every room she was working on, so that she and everyone helping her could see what they were working toward. Louise Tate became one of Carol Ann's closest collaborators. She knew the history of the building in detail that no document could have provided. The stories of the people who had stayed there, the local legends attached to various rooms, the original names that guests and locals had given to different parts of the building. Room 14, apparently, Hama had been known locally as the honeymoon room since the 1930s because of a carved heart that some long-ago guest had etched into the window frame overlooking the mountains. The heart was still there when Carol Ann found it, faded but intact. She left it exactly as it was, but not everything was going smoothly. The county building inspector, a man named Dennis Pryor, who had been in the role for 19 years, issued a stop work order in July, citing concerns about the structural certification of the West Wing renovation. The order was not arbitrary. The West Wing had significant load-bearing questions that Carol Ann had been working through with a structural engineer, and Dennis was doing his job correctly and carefully. But the stop work order froze all permitted renovation activity for 6 weeks while the structural assessment was completed and submitted. 6 weeks. Carol Ann had Tyler and Haley in a county school system that was decent but strained. She had loan repayment obligations beginning in month 8. She had contractors whose schedules were going to move on to other projects if the pause stretched too long. She had $11,000 left in her working capital, and she had a stop work order on her wall. She did not call her sister Karen. She did not call her mother. She did not, for the record, call Douglas Mercer, who had by this point moved in with Renee in a new house in the Dublin suburb of Columbus, the same neighborhood Carol Ann had left. What she did was call Patricia Holt, her divorce attorney, who had become something of an informal advisor to Carol Ann on matters beyond the legal. Patricia told her to get the structural report done as fast as possible, to stay on top of the engineer, and to document everything. Carol Ann called the structural engineer, a woman named Dr. Renata Osei out of the University of Tennessee's Civil Engineering Department, who had been doing work on historic Appalachian structures for 15 years and who had agreed to consult on the Harlan House project at a reduced rate because it was precisely the kind of preservation work her research focused on. Dr. Osei had the assessment completed in 3 weeks instead of the standard 6. The West Wing was declared structurally sound with 2 specific reinforcement requirements that were added to the renovation plan. The stop work order was lifted. Carol Ann stood in the parking lot of the Harlan House on the morning the order was lifted and looked at the building for a long moment. Then she went inside and got back to work. By the fall of the first year, the Harlan House had its plumbing, its electrical, a fully remediated basement, a structurally certified frame, and 7 completed guest rooms. Carol Ann had used every dollar of the USDA loan, run through her personal reserve entirely, and was now operating on a second small loan she had taken from the state's Rural Business Development Fund. $22,000 at a rate she was not thrilled about, but had no alternative to. She was working 16-hour days. She had developed calluses on her hands that she had never had in her life. She had learned, so from YouTube tutorials and from Earl Bowman and from Walt Gruber and from a tiling contractor she had hired for exactly 4 days before she watched him closely enough to do it herself. How to lay tile, how to plaster walls, how to refinish hardwood floors, how to rehang doors, how to install light fixtures, how to strip paint from original woodwork without damaging it, how to repoint the mortar on the stone fireplace in the reading room. She had also learned something about herself that she had not fully known before, that she was genuinely fearless in the face of physical work, that the kind of exhaustion she felt at the end of a day when she had built something was completely different from every other kind of exhaustion she had ever experienced. It was the exhaustion of creation, and it felt, she later said, Nakori like the most honest tiredness of her life. Tyler, now 13, had become her shadow on weekends. He had a natural mechanical instinct and spent most of his free time helping with whatever task was in progress, asking questions about every tool and every process. Haley, at 10, had taken to exploring every corner of the building with the kind of proprietary confidence that children develop toward places they have adopted as their own. She had named most of the rooms after things she loved. Room 11 was the Blue Moon Room because of the particular way the light hit the walls in the evening. Room 14, where the carved heart was, she called the Forever Room. Carol Ann let her keep every name. The Harlan House opened on a Friday in June. 18 months after Carol Ann Whitfield had handed over a check for $41,000 in the parking lot of a title company in Columbus, Ohio. 12 of the 22 rooms were ready. The lobby had been fully restored. The mahogany desk refinished to its original warm depth. The tin ceiling in the dining room cleaned and sealed. The reading room with its stone fireplace furnished with second-hand chairs that Carol Ann had reupholstered herself over 3 consecutive evenings. The garden patio had been cleared and replanted and strung with lights, exactly like the black and white photographs from Louise Tate's attic. The Harlan House had a website, built by a young woman from the county high school who Carol Ann had hired for $400, and a standing invitation to use the hotel whenever she wanted. It had a social media presence that Carol Ann had been building quietly for 4 months, posting photographs of the renovation process that had gradually accumulated a modest but engaged following of people who had been watching the transformation unfold. The first weekend was fully booked, all 12 rooms. Carol Ann had priced the rooms between $89 and $149 a night, well below what comparable boutique properties in more developed markets charge, but appropriate for the market she was entering and the audience she was trying to reach. Every single guest that first weekend was a stranger to her. Not a family member, not a friend, not a local who had come out of curiosity. Real travelers, real guests, who had found the Harlan House online and chosen it because of what they saw in those renovation photographs. One of those guests was a travel writer. Her name was Sarah Vance. She wrote for a regional publication that covered Appalachian travel and culture, and she had been following the Harlan House's renovation on social media for 3 months before she finally booked a room. She spent the weekend. She talked to Carol Ann for 2 hours on the stone patio on Saturday evening, and she wrote a piece that ran the following Tuesday under the headline, "A woman rebuilt this hotel alone. What she built was more than rooms." The article ran on a Tuesday morning and was shared 14,000 times by Wednesday afternoon. By Thursday, it had been picked up by 3 larger regional outlets. By Friday, a national lifestyle publication had reached out to Carol Ann requesting a feature. The following week, a travel blog with over 400,000 followers ran a full photo essay on the Harlan House that had been written based on the Sarah Vance piece. By the end of June, the Harlan House was fully booked for the next 11 weeks. All 12 rooms, every weekend, and most weeknights filling in as well. Carol Ann had to hire staff. She brought on 3 local women for housekeeping, a young man from the county who became her front desk manager, and a retired cook named Bertie Holloway who agreed to come in on weekends and prepare a breakfast service that became, within 2 months, one of the most talked about aspects of a stay at the Harlan House. Bertie's biscuits, made from a recipe she had been using for 51 years, were referenced in no fewer than 9 of the first 100 online reviews the property received. The Harlan House's story continued to travel. A national newspaper ran a brief item on it. A television producer from Nashville reached out about a documentary segment. A real estate investment firm sent Carol Ann a letter offering to buy the property for $1.4 million. She declined without deliberating. By the end of the first full year of operation, the Harlan House had generated $312,000 in gross revenue. Carol Ann had paid off the USDA loan in full, retired the state development loan, and had begun the renovation of the remaining 10 rooms. She had also hired a full-time manager so that she could take her first actual weekend off since arriving in Tennessee. A weekend she spent hiking in the mountains outside Harlan with Tyler and Haley, who had by that point become genuine Tennesseans, with local friends and strong opinions about the best swimming holes in the county. And on the evening of that first real weekend off, sitting with her children on a rock overlooking a valley as the light went gold and long over the mountains, Carol Ann Whitfield got a phone call. It was from a number she recognized. Douglas Mercer. It was the third time he had called in 6 months. She looked at his name on the screen for a moment. Then she put the phone face down on the rock and watched the sun set over Harlan County, Tennessee. She didn't answer. Here is the part of the story that Carol Ann herself did not know when she bought the Harlan House. The part that she discovered 8 months into the renovation when she was stripping the original wallpaper in the second floor corridor and found behind the paper a door, not a closet, una door, sealed with plaster sometime in what the preservation architect who examined it estimated to be the mid-1970s, based on the composition of the plaster fill. Behind the door, after Carol Ann had removed the plaster fill over the course of an afternoon and pushed the door open for the first time in what was likely 50 years, was a room, a small room, barely 10 feet by 12, that had clearly been used as an office or records room at some point. There was a wooden desk, a metal filing cabinet, rusted shut, a window bricked over from the outside that had let in no light since the room was sealed, and on the desk, under 50 years of dust, a leather-bound ledger book, a guest register, the Harlan House guest register for the years 1941 through 1953. Carol Ann sat on the floor of that small sealed room with the ledger book in her lap and went through it page by page. The names were a cross-section of American mid-century life. Traveling salesmen, coal company executives, a state senator from Nashville who had apparently stayed regularly through the mid-1940s, a jazz musician whose name Carol Ann had to look up and discovered had been a sideman on recordings she recognized. And on a page dated September 14th, 1948, in handwriting that was careful and deliberate and slightly different from the cursive the register used throughout, there was a note, not a guest name, a note written directly in the margins of the guest register in small, precise letters. It read, "This house has held 100 lives. Build yours here carefully." Carol Ann photographed every page of that register. She had a preservation specialist stabilize the book. She placed it behind glass in a frame in the Harlan House lobby, open to that page, where every guest who checks in can read those words for themselves. She has never determined who wrote that note. She has never needed to, because whoever wrote it in 1948, in a room that was subsequently sealed and hidden for 50 years, wrote it for her. She is certain of that in the way that certain people are certain of things that cannot be proven. And looking at everything that happened, the divorce, the $47,000, the condemned building, the sealed room, the ledger, the note, it is genuinely difficult to argue with her. Carol Ann Whitfield is 42 years old as of this telling. The Harlan House is fully operational, all 22 rooms. It has been recognized by 2 regional travel publications as one of the top boutique historic hotels in the Appalachian South. It employs 11 full-time and part-time staff, all from Harlan County. It has hosted weddings, anniversaries, reunions, solo travelers, writers on retreat, photographers, and at least 3 couples who have told Carol Ann that they got engaged in room 14, the forever room with the carved heart in the window frame. Tyler is 15 now and helps run the hotel's social media when he isn't in school. He has told his mother he wants to study business. Haley is 12 and has announced with complete certainty that the Harlan House is hers when she grows up. which Carol Ann finds simultaneously amusing and moving. Douglas Mercer's firm underwent a significant financial restructuring in 2022, following the departure of several key clients. He and Renee separated in 2023. He has called Carol Ann 4 times in total. She has not returned any of the calls, not out of bitterness. Carol Ann will tell you that herself, out of completeness. That chapter is finished. There is nothing to add to it. What is interesting, what is worth sitting with for a moment, is the question of what would have happened if Douglas Mercer had been a different kind of man. If he had listened when Carol Ann talked about the hotel, if he had supported the dream instead of dismissing it, if he had treated her as a partner rather than a supporting character in his own story. Would the Harlan House exist? Would those 11 Harlan County jobs exist? Would the guest register be in that lobby frame? Would Tyler know how to refinish hardwood floors and Haley know the story behind every single room? The answer, almost certainly, is no. Douglas Mercer leaving Carol Ann Whitfield was the worst thing that ever happened to her. And it was the best thing that ever happened to her. Those two things are both completely true at the same time. There is a particular kind of courage that does not look like courage from the outside. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive in a dramatic moment with a clear beginning and a clear end. It arrives quietly in the middle of the night in a small apartment in Westerville, Ohio. When you are alone and you are broke and you are scared and your kids are asleep down the hall and you open a laptop and you look at a property listing, you bookmarked 3 years ago and you call the agent at 11:47 in the evening and leave a voicemail. That is where Carol Ann Whitfield's story turned. Not in the lobby of the Harlan House. Not when the article went viral. Not when the revenue crossed $300,000. It turned in that quiet apartment on that quiet night, when she chose to move toward the thing she had always wanted instead of away from it. I think about that a lot. I think about how many people are sitting right now with a version of that bookmark listing on their own laptop. Something they saved once, looked at briefly, shunned and closed because the timing wasn't right, or the circumstances weren't right, or someone important to them had that faint smile that told them it wasn't worth pursuing. I think about how much of the world's best work is sitting in those closed browser tabs. And I want to ask you something, not about Carol Ann, about you. What is the thing that you have been waiting for the right moment to start? Because if Carol Ann Whitfield's story tells us anything, if the Harlan House and the sealed room and the guest register and those 11 jobs and those 2 children who grew up watching their mother build something from nothing tell us anything at all, it is this. There is no right moment. There is only the moment when you decide. Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know. I read every single one of them. And if this story moved you, if something in Carol Ann's journey hit somewhere real, share this video with one person who needs to hear it right now. And subscribe, because the next story we're bringing you is one that will stay with you for a long time. You will not want to miss it.